Thank you so much for joining us for Bethel at Home. Oh my goodness. Are you guys used to wearing a mask in public yet? I don't know about you guys, but it is difficult. Did you ever realize how much you read lips? And eye contact is more important now than ever, right? So I read an article this week that was talking about too much eye contact seems intimidating and can come off rude. But not enough eye contact can come off insensitive and rude. So good luck to you with finding the perfect amount of eye contact while wearing your mask in public. Maybe we'll all get used to it soon. At 11 o'clock today is going to be our first opportunity to regather here in Yukon. We're going to come together to say thank you to Logan and Kelsey Key for all their service here at Bethel for the last 6 years. So come right after the services, joining us, get free ice cream sandwiches, and let's show the love to the Key family. Today we are starting a new series called Tension. As Christians, we can find ourselves tied to so many different things, and we're going to be focusing on where we truly need to be tied. So let's get started.
Do you ever remember when you were a kid and you walked up to a roller coaster for the first time and you were absolutely terrified? For me, this was a moment. We used to go to a theme park when we were growing up with our church to a place called Cedar Point. And they just got this new roller coaster in. It was literally almost a 90-degree drop from the top. And it had all these like different ups and downs and curves. And I just remember being so excited to try this roller coaster. But when I got up to it, I remember being absolutely terrified. I looked to my friend in line and I was like, dude, I don't know if I can ride this thing. And he's like, come on, dude, it'll be fine. And I'm like, no, seriously, the longer I wait in this line and the more I see the complexity of this roller coaster, I don't know if I have the faith that it's actually going to be something fun. It could end up really, really bad. And so I think about that time in my life and I relate it to, in some ways, to following Jesus. Following Jesus can be intimidating at times. Following Jesus, he asked us to actually do some pretty radical things. But here's what's cool is when you think about a roller coaster and walking up to it for the first time, your mind is filled with all these fears of like, is the harness gonna hold me? Is this thing gonna break down in the middle of this loop while I'm hanging upside down? Is it gonna come off the tracks? Is it gonna stop in time, or is it just gonna keep going when it's supposed to and just completely destroy my body, right? And so, but here's the difference is like when we ride the roller coaster for the first time, and I remember riding that roller coaster for the first time, I got off and I turned to my friend that convinced me to ride it. And I looked at him and I said, that was awesome. And I remember he was like, dude, let's go do it again. And what did we do? We went right back and we got back in line. And so following Jesus is kind of like that too. When we actually like step into and lean into the things that God asks us to do and says, and live the life that he's invited us to live, I think we experience an incredible amount of joy, and we experience an incredible amount of peace, and we realize that like, man, this journey that Jesus has me on is this incredible ride that if I would have let the fear, if I would have let the anxiety and all the different things that are running through my mind hold me back from actually following him, look at all the things that I would have missed out on. We do this in life with simple things like sitting in a chair, right? Intuitively, we just walk up to a chair and we sit down in it. Why do we do this? Because we've built almost like this resume inside our minds that says chairs are going to hold me, right? I don't think a lot about sitting in chairs. I just walk up to them. This one that I'm sitting in right now, I didn't like walk up to it and kind of test it out or, put some pressure on it to make sure it would hold me. I just pulled up the chair and I sat down. We do this because over time, the more that we do something and we get in the habit of actually like doing some things, we just intuitively trust that they're going to do what they were supposed to do. Like this chair. I knew that it was going to hold me. Why? Because it had a track record. I had a track record of sitting in chairs and not falling out of them, right? And following Jesus is kind of the same way, right? Like as we lean into some of the things that Jesus asked us to do and we actually walk in obedience, we find that the things that he tells us to do actually produce an incredible amount of joy and peace in our life. And we learn that more and more that we can trust him. Over the next couple of weeks, we're going to be talking about this idea of tension. So to be a Christian actually raises a ton of tension in our life. To actually follow Jesus and what he invites us to do and the life that he invites us to live can be incredibly scary at times. You may be sitting and watching this and you may be skeptical about following Jesus and this whole what it means to actually follow him and what that looks like in your life. And you may have kind of resisted it for a long time because you're like, man, I don't know if I can actually do the things that Jesus has invited me to do. And so over the next couple of weeks, we're going to look at Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7, where Jesus sits down on the mountainside. We know this. If you've been in church for any amount of time, you know that it's called the Sermon on the Mount. And he sits down on this mountainside and he's teaching his disciples some pretty radical things, some things that we're going to look at today that will actually raise a lot of tension in your heart. And I want to look at a few of those things in Matthew chapter 5 with you today. And so if you look at verse... So he makes these statements. He says, you have heard, or basically this is kind of what you're used to, but I say, and then it's followed by this incredibly radical statement of like, what? That's like unbelievable. I don't know if I can really do that. So I want to walk through a couple of those with you. And it's Matthew chapter 5, verse 21 and verse 22. He says this, he says, you have heard, do not murder. And then Jesus says, but I say, if you're even angry with someone, you are subject to judgment. If you curse someone, you are in danger of the fires of hell. And you're like, whoa, that raises a lot of tension in my heart. Matthew chapter 5, verse 27 and 28, he says, you have heard, you must not commit adultery. But I say, anyone who even looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery in his heart. And you're like, whoa, so you mean if I've like actually just looked at someone and thought lustful thoughts about them that I've actually committed adultery? That's pretty radical. And he says this in verse 31 and 32. He says, you have heard a man can divorce his wife by merely giving a written notice of divorce. But I say, a man who divorces his wife, unless she has been unfaithful, causes her to commit adultery, and anyone who marries a divorced woman will also commit adultery. He says this in verse 33 through 37. He says, you have heard, you must not break your vows. You must carry out your vows that you make to the Lord. And then he says, but I say, don't make any vows. He says, simply say, yes, I will, or no, I won't. Anything beyond that is from the evil one. And you're like, geez, like, and then he says in verse 38 through 42, he says, you've heard the law says the punishment must match the injury. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. I kind of like this one because it's like, okay, that means that I can just kind of get back at the person that got me. And I naturally want to do that. But then Jesus comes along and he says, no. He says, I say, do not resist an evil person. If someone slaps you on the right cheek, he says, offer him the left one. And I'm like, okay, that seems counterintuitive to like what I naturally want to do. And then Jesus says this in Matthew chapter 5, 43 through 45. He says, you have heard the law says, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. Again, one of those things that for me is kind of easy to do because it's easy to love the people that love me. But the people who come against me and hate me, that's kind of hard to then turn around and love them in return. And Jesus says, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you. And in that way, you will be acting as true children of your Father is in heaven. So you're probably experiencing an incredible amount of tension in your heart right now with these statements that Jesus is making. And here's what's crazy. So he was explaining that it wasn't just about following a list of rules, but it was actually this transformation that needed to take place in the heart. Okay, and that would lead to a different life. It would lead to someone actually walking in obedience. And so he made these radical statements, and he actually made them to the point where they were so unachievable by our own ability and by our own thinking that we were forced to rely on him, that we were forced to transform our hearts or allow him to transform our hearts so that we could walk in obedience to these things that he's calling us to do. So these radical commandments raise tension in our heart. And they only raise tension because there's this very real sense that I actually can't do these things on my own. And so here's what I want to do now. I want to invite Pastor Ray to to come into the conversation, and we're going to kind of talk through some of these tensions that Jesus raises in Matthew chapter 5, so that we can maybe take a look at how they practically play out in our lives. So Ray, we're talking about this idea of tension and these radical statements that Jesus makes in Matthew chapter 5. And so I want to ask you a question. Have you ever murdered someone?
No. I've wanted to.
Really
I mean,
long.
I was thinking through because I've lived in other countries and I'm just trying to put it all together, but no, I was listening to you speak and it's like building this, it's almost like a little bit of anxiety about not being able to meet the standard.
Yeah.
And so the first, Jesus' first statement is like, yeah, that's us. That's how we think. But then when he follows it up with the tension, like the difficulty, I was thinking about Cedar Point actually. And I've been to Cedar Point, and there's only one roller coaster in my entire life that's given me a little bit of anxiety. And it's that corkscrew one that they pull you up this corkscrew and then they drop you and then you go up another corkscrew the other side.
Yes.
Oh man,
what that one's
terrible.
called.
And you feel like you're going into the sky, into the clouds,
Yes.
it's like
Wicked Twister. That's what it's called.
Yeah. So I've been there. So I know the feeling when you're getting up there and then when you're sitting in it and you're just like, whoa.
And your stomach's still up at the top.
And so that's what I felt like when you were reading through this passage. But no, to answer your question, I've never physically murdered anyone.
Yeah, and so it's interesting that you say I've never physically murdered anyone, because Jesus makes this like really clear. He says no, but if you've actually had hate in your heart towards someone, then you've already committed murder in a sense in your heart.
I kind of wonder if we could follow people around while they're driving, while they're kids, with their siblings, with their classmates. Would you just see a bunch of dead bodies everywhere? Is that what visually you'd be like, huh? He didn't do anything, but there's done.
Just people dying. Yeah, because how many people do we kill like at the heart level?
Yeah.
And really what we're saying, I think, with this whole hatred thing is really, I want that person to die. I mean, it's essentially what we're saying when we say, I hate you. Is like, I no longer want you to be in existence, because whether it's something they did to us or whether, it's a conflict that we're working through or whatever. And so so
it's not only like physical, but it's in our hearts and our emotions. And Jesus says, don't call someone an idiot. And so how many times do we like idiot, under our breath even?
Yep. I do that all the time. Yeah.
That's a pretty big deal. Well, then the next section that you read, and I'm glad I get to ask this question have you ever committed adultery on your wife?
Thankfully, I can say no.
Okay, I haven't either. Full disclaimer. I haven't either. I haven't either. Well, Jesus follows it up again with another difficult thing, is that he says, okay, so you haven't committed adultery physically, but if you've looked on someone of the opposite sex, and specifically here he's talking about a woman, if you've looked upon a woman and you've had twisted thoughts in your mind, or if you've said, oh, I'm enjoying the menu, I'm not ordering anything, like a lot of people say. So it's like, I'm just enjoying God's creation or whatever. Jesus says that we actually are guilty in our heart. So I won't ask you that question, because I think if you're human, there's this lust that happens in your mind and in your heart, and that's difficult. And so I think in everyday conversations and everyday activities, it's not like we're walking around just like terrible, but it is one of those things where Jesus ups the level of stress.
Yeah. And how many thoughts do you have in your in your daily life, your normal daily life. You think about how many thoughts you have and how many of those are actually evil. You know what I mean? And so if it's down to the nitty gritty of Jesus is actually the very thoughts that you think are actually what condemn you, then it's like, wow, there's a lot of work that needs to be done at the heart level for me, because I can't tell you how many thoughts I have that are evil toward whether that's hatred or whether those are lustful thoughts or whatever, and so it's a difficult thing.
And so I think as a pastor, it's like we think that, and maybe there's a misconception that we just kind of have this level of spirituality, maybe, or something, but it's no, we struggle with these things just like everyone else. You're reading through this passage. I like the very first part of the passage, but then I get into this stuff and I'm like, ooh, this is a little harder, a little more difficult. Yeah.
So for example, not just hating somebody, but not in committing adultery, but have you ever broken a promise?
That I have done.
Yeah. And me too. So unfortunately, yes, I've been guilty of breaking a promise, and I'm also guilty of not just keeping my word at times. You were, I can't remember when you were talking about it, but you said something about like, you'll tell Christy that you'll be home at a certain time and you don't show up,
right?
On time.
I intend to, and it's in my mind, it's in my heart. I actually tell myself, okay, I can get home. I've got 7 minutes. I can be there. When there's no possibility that I'm ever going to be home in 7 minutes. It's going to take me 7 minutes to get in my car. And so, yes, I don't keep my promises, and then I actually break the things that I intend to follow through with.
Yeah.
And that's complicated. That's tough. Well, what about this? It says, the next part, Jesus is talking about bringing justice to certain situations. So have you brought your own justice to situations?
Oh, yeah, all the time. And this one for me is like, actually, when I read it, I'm like, like
eye for an eye, baby.
Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. And that's so natural for me as a human, because when I hurt, I want other people to hurt. The phrase, I think Christy said it last week, about hurt people. And I'm like, yeah, that's a natural thing, because I want somebody to pay. And that ties into the forgiveness that we've been talking about over the last couple of weeks. So there's a real tension there in my heart that's like, wait, you're telling me I can't get even now? But they hurt me, or they did this to me. You don't understand. And so it's kind of that one for me raises a lot of tension. So have you done, how have you been about loving your enemies?
It's easy for me to say that I love my enemies as long as I don't see them. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. If they're not in front of me and I don't have to interact with them every day, or they're not in my normal circle. Oh yeah, I love them all day long.
Yeah, because it's easier said than done, right?
Yeah.
So you can.
But if they cross my path, ooh, that's a different thing.
Yeah, and we know when there's kind of that, we feel there's a physical like tension that raises in your heart when somebody who's messed you up, or somebody who's hurt you in your life, or whether it was way in the past or not. And we know that we feel that tension raise up inside of us when we see them in person. So that's a very interesting thing, whether it's at like a grocery store or you see them just out in public, and you may be way at a distance from them, but you feel like this physical, like there's something rising in your heart of like, oh man, like I hope they don't come over here, or I hope I don't actually cross paths with them, because then I'm going to have a conversation with them and all that stuff. So,
and then it just becomes awkward and it's strange. And I think all of us know that if I'm going to interact with someone that I have something against, I'm going to try to avoid it, or I'm actually maybe going to be nasty to them. And that is kind of a natural thing. And I think this whole passage, as we're reading through it, it's like, you imagine yourself sitting on the hill, listening to Jesus speak. He's done all these miracles. He's invited us to follow him. And then he goes, okay, now you've heard this and this. And so we think, okay, Jesus, where are you going with this? This is like this is unattainable. Even the Pharisees, it's unattainable.
Yeah, and that was the interesting thing, is that he's kind of referencing back to some of these, as we'll talk about in the weeks to come, but like these religious leaders who like had it all figured out on the outside, right? Yeah. Like there's some of these things that You're like, yeah, I can do that. Yeah, I can do that. You read through this list and it kind of makes sense until Jesus adds on these like radical statements that you're like, okay, I actually can't do that anymore. You know what I mean? And I already have not followed through that. I've already broken every single one of these laws. And so you become overwhelmed, and it creates this like really tight, this tightness in your chest, and this really this tension that you're like, I actually can't do this. And so for all of this, we need God's grace for all of this. So what makes the gospel such good news, and here's where I want you to just really lock in, is that Matthew chapter 5, verse 17 says this. It says, don't misunderstand why I have come. I didn't come to abolish the law. And then later he says, no, I have come to accomplish their purpose. So the only way that we can actually walk in obedience, the only way that we can actually live out the things that Jesus is asking us to do and live the life that he's called us to, is by his grace. And understanding that he's already accomplished these things for us. And so there's a transformation that begins to take place at my heart and at the heart level, that I realize, oh my goodness, I can't do this on my own. And I actually need Jesus to intervene. I need Jesus to transform me to a place where that I can actually obey the things that he says that I should do. And so what is Jesus saying in all of this? Like, the bottom line, and this is what I really want you to understand, is that Jesus is more concerned with transforming your heart than he is with modifying your behavior. I'll say that again. Jesus is more concerned with transforming your heart than he is with modifying your behavior.
So let me ask you a question here, because I think this is where Christians really come into some trouble, because they think, okay, if I'm going to become a Christian, there's this list of things I need to do. And as soon as I accomplish that, I'm going to be good with God. And yet sitting listening to Jesus like, no, it's not about this list. It's about your heart. And so why do you think Christians struggle so much with this tension? Like, why is this tension here?
I know for me, I can't speak for everyone, but I can speak for myself and say that it's really, I want to control the outcome. I want to control the outcome of my life, and even where I end up eternally based on what I've done. I mean, that's why legalism and the whole works-based system is so, I'm drawn to that. Like, I think my heart is drawn to that, because if you can put a list in front of me, I'm by nature kind of a rule follower anyways. And so if you put a list in front of me, I'm like, okay, cool, I can do that. That's why I think I love those statements that Jesus says at the beginning. Yeah, like, you have heard. I'm like, yeah. Like, I can do that. But then when Jesus flips it upside down on its head and says, no, actually you can't, then I'm left to put my faith in something else, someone else that's bigger than me. And so it's like this rope. So I want to illustrate this for you. It's like, for example, if I took this rope and I tied it to myself, right? And I say, okay, man, I can do this. I can accomplish all these things that Jesus says that I should do, right? It's like being tied to nothing. So if I were to take this rope and I were to just throw it off the edge of the counter, right? Then I think, man, I'm good. I look at that first list and I'm like, sweet, I can do this. And so I think I'm able to add some tension, but what happens is I'm actually not tied to anything. And so I can pull this rope all day long, and I can lean into what I think is going to be able to hold me. And it's really not. There's slack in the line, so to speak. And if you've ever been rappelling, or if you've ever been, rock climbing or anything like that, slack in the line is never good.
Don't go off the edge.
Yeah. Like, you'll fall to your death, right? Like, there's nothing holding on to me.
And so maybe what you're describing is the dissatisfaction in most Christians' lives. People that are doing the right things, going to the right activities, thinking the right things. They're not necessarily talking about transformation. They're just talking about outward activity, and that's where all the slack in the line is.
And that causes a lot of frustration, because we're like, I want to tie myself to my behavior and how I live functionally, but my salvation and my rescue and the transformation that takes place in the heart is not tied to any of that. It's only tied to Jesus. And so we're going to be talking more about that in the coming weeks. But I think, man, there's a real tension there when you realize that, man, I'm not really tied to anything, but we want so bad to tie ourselves to like this behavior. When Jesus says, man, it's not about your behavior. It's about this heart transformation that takes place. And I'm the only one that can transform your heart. I'm the only one that can provide the grace that you need for your life to actually change. And so, man, we want to invite you. I want to invite you to say, man, I want to put my faith and my trust in Jesus. If you're out there today and you're listening and you're saying, man, for so long, I've put my faith and my trust and my hope in something, and I've tied myself to something that will not hold me. And you find yourself dissatisfied because you're doing all the right things. You're obeying the first set of rules, so to speak, to a T. You're like, man, I've never killed anyone. I didn't commit adultery on my wife. I didn't I brought justice to people. I'm a man or a woman of integrity, and I keep my word all the time, and all this kind of stuff. And it's not satisfying you. It's because Jesus never intended for you to be tied to those things. He said, I want you to be tied to me. And he offers us life. He invites us into this life where we put our faith and our trust in him, and we realize, man, there's a transformation that's taking place, and Jesus has already modeled and accomplished all of these things that he says perfectly on my behalf so that I didn't have to. And good. He knows that when our hearts are transformed, that leads to obedience. So we don't have to try to obey these things, but when we put our faith and our trust in Jesus, and we trust in him, and we are tied ourselves to him, then our lives begin to take shape in the way that he would intend them to.
So almost right before he started this whole dialogue, I'm going to read this verse again that you read earlier, which is, don't misunderstand why I have come. Jesus speaking. Everyone misunderstood the Messiah was coming. The Savior was coming. They thought he was going to set up an earthly kingdom. And yet he was trying to transform hearts, the intangibles. And so he says, I didn't come to abolish the law. No, I came to accomplish their purpose. And he sets it up. And I think maybe we just skip that to head to the hard stuff. And so today, I mean, we need to see where we're tied. Like, what are we tying our lives into? Where's our anchor?
And we want to invite you to this morning. Man, if you don't have a relationship with Jesus, if you've been tying yourselves to the law and the list of rules that you've been obeying and trying to obey your entire life, but you've never put your faith and trust in Jesus, who actually accomplishes the law for us and brings about this transformation, man, I want to invite you to put your faith and trust in him. And you can, it's not about a prayer. It's not about even the words that you're saying, but again, it's about this heart transformation. So I want to invite you to pray this prayer with me and to put your faith and your trust in Jesus and to tie yourself to him. And so let's pray. Pray this with me. Dear God, I recognize that I am broken, that I'm a sinner, that I've messed up, and there's nothing that I can do to tie myself to righteousness. There's nothing that I can do in and of myself under my own power to receive salvation, that it only comes by you and putting our faith and my trust in you. God, you say in your word that you are the way, the truth, and the life. And so, God, I want to invite you to come into my life and to rescue me from my brokenness. And today, I put my faith and my trust in you. Amen.
Amen. Awesome.
And so, man, if you made that decision today, we want to know about it. We want to celebrate with you, and we want to celebrate the goodness of God in your life. And so let us know by filling out the connection card on our website, mybethel.cc/connect. And we would love to connect with you and actually walk alongside with you as you discover this new journey and faith in Jesus.
What a great song we can sing together today as we enter into worship. The goodness of God. It's because of his goodness that we even have an option to tie ourselves to him.
Yep, absolutely.
Let's sing together.
I love you, Lord. Oh, your mercy never fails me. All my days I've been held in your hands. From the moment that I wake up until I lay my head, I will sing of the goodness of God. And all my life you have been faithful. And all my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, I will sing of the goodness of God. I love your voice. You have led me through the fire in darkest night. You are close like no other. I've known you as a father. I've known you as a friend. I have lived in the goodness of God. And all my life you have been faithful. And all my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, I will sing of the goodness of God. Cause your goodness is running after me. And your goodness is running after me. With my life laid down, I surrender now. I give you everything. Your goodness is running after me. And your goodness is running after me. Your goodness is running after me. With my life laid down, I surrender now. I give you everything. Your goodness is running after me. And all my life you have been faithful. And all my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, I will sing of the goodness of God. And all my life you have been faithful. And all my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, I will sing of the goodness of God. I will sing of the goodness of God.
All right, so we're going to see you at 11 o'clock at Bethel, Yukon. Sorry, Florida, we'd love for you guys to come and join us, but we know it's a little far away. But we're going to join at 11 o'clock in the parking lot. We're going to eat some ice cream sandwiches, show some love to Kelsey and Logan, say thank you to them for all their years of service here at Bethel, and we get to see you face to face for the first time in a long time. We're excited about that. The 31st, we have a tailgate party in the parking lot. Go to mybethel.cc for all the details. Can't wait to see you.
Yes, and remember that here at Bethel, we exist to love and lead one another to find and follow Jesus. See you guys soon.
Love you guys.